You're earning more than you ever have. Your career has progressed exactly as you planned. You're not in debt. You're not reckless. And yet, there's a persistent sense that you're losing ground. Not to strangers. Not to people who started with advantages you didn't have. To people who started exactly where you did. This isn't envy. It's something more structural, and the cost is higher than most people realize. The conventional wisdom on social comparison and money follows a predictable script. Don't compare yourself to others. Run your own race. Focus on what you can control. All of it true, none of it helpful. Because the problem isn't that you're comparing. The problem is that when your peers advance financially, the definition of what constitutes normal success shifts without announcement, and you respond to that shift not through deliberate choice, but through a series of quiet recalibrations. They feel entirely reasonable in the moment, but they accumulate into something costly. Not costly in the way you'd expect. Not through obvious overspending or financial mistakes. Costly in ways that don't appear on any statement. Let me show you what this actually looks like in practice. You're 36. You work in product, consulting, maybe software sales. You earn $110,000. 3 years ago, that felt significant. Real progress. More than your parents made at your age. Enough to build a good life. Then someone from your MBA cohort exits their startup. Not for life-changing money. For $3.5 million. After taxes and founder dilution, they clear just under $2 million. They're still working. Still seem grounded. But something has fundamentally changed about their relationship to money. Another friend makes partner at 38. Suddenly pulling $250,000. Buys a home in a neighborhood you dismissed as impossible for another decade. A former colleague took a VP role at a pre-IPO company. Took a lateral move on salary. 3 years later the company goes public. Her equity package is worth $800,000. She doesn't broadcast it. You learn about it tangentially. She seems the same. But she's working fewer hours now, traveling more. There's an ease to her decision-making that wasn't there before. You're still at 110. You got a solid performance review. An 8% raise. By objective standards, you're doing well. Better than the median. Better than most. But the frame has shifted. Here's the first mental model, and it requires precision to understand. Your sense of financial adequacy is not anchored to absolute metrics. It's anchored to a reference point that moves based on the financial position of people you consider peers. When those peers were making $70,000, 110 felt like real success. When those same peers are making $250,000 or hold liquid assets in the 7 figures, 110 feels insufficient. Not because your circumstances changed. Because the center of gravity moved. This is not a psychological weakness. It's structural. You cannot avoid noticing. You cannot exempt yourself from having a reference group. And you cannot prevent your mind from using that group as a benchmark for what success at your age and education level should look like. Most people assume that awareness neutralizes this. It doesn't. Knowing you're experiencing reference point drift doesn't eliminate the feeling of falling behind. You still perceive the gap. you still respond to it. And here is where the hidden cost begins to accumulate. You don't respond to this perceived gap with one dramatic, reckless decision. You respond with marginal adjustments that each feel entirely defensible. You move to a better apartment. Not extravagant. Just closer in quality to what your peer who made partner has. The increase is $500 a month. Well within your budget. Comfortable. Even, you replace your car, not with a luxury vehicle. Just something newer, more reliable, more consistent with where you are professionally. The payment is manageable. You travel more deliberately, not recklessly, but the quality has increased. You're staying in better hotels. You're not optimizing for budget anymore. You're 36. This feels age appropriate. You join a different gym because the previous one feels misaligned with your professional identity. You update your wardrobe. You dine at restaurants with better wine lists. None of it feels wasteful. All of it feels reasonable. But here's what actually happened. Your income increased by 15% over 3 years. Your baseline expenses increased by 28%. And you did it so gradually, so incrementally, that you barely registered the shift. And it's the most expensive dynamic most high earners never quantify. Let that settle for a moment. You are now structurally less financially secure than you were 3 years ago, despite earning significantly more. Because expenses that feel discretionary, when you adopt them, become fixed once you've adapted to them. The nicer apartment stops being a luxury after 4 months. It's just your apartment. The car payment isn't optional anymore. It's embedded in your monthly operating structure. Your quality of life hasn't increased proportionally to the increase in spending, but your financial flexibility has contracted considerably. This is the hidden cost, not the money itself. The optionality you surrendered without recognizing it as a decision. Let me take this deeper. Most people believe the primary risk of keeping up with successful peers is overspending. That's not the real risk. The real risk is signaling maintenance cost. Signaling maintenance cost is the sustained expense of maintaining the appearance that you belong in a peer group that has moved ahead of you financially. Here's the mechanism. Your friends are acquiring investment properties, not speculating. Purchasing cash-flowing rental properties in secondary markets. You don't have the liquidity for that yet, but you also don't want to signal that you're not at that stage. So you don't decline the conversation. You say you're evaluating opportunities, or that you're focused on other vehicles right now. They're enrolling their children in private schools. You don't have children yet. But when you do, you've already internalized that public school would signal you're behind. So that future cost is encoded into your financial planning, even though it's years away. They're outsourcing time-intensive tasks. House cleaning, meal preparation, personal training. These aren't luxuries in their framework. They're efficiency purchases, time arbitrage, reasonable tools for managing a demanding professional life. And when they discuss these casually, as baseline infrastructure, you feel the discontinuity. You can't afford these without material stress. But you also can't acknowledge that without signaling financial inadequacy. So you adopt some of them, or you justify why you don't need them yet. or you quietly restructure your budget to accommodate them. Here's what makes this particularly corrosive. You're not emulating people who are financially reckless. You're emulating people who are genuinely successful. People who made disciplined decisions. People who earned their position. There's nothing ethically wrong with their spending, and that makes it vastly more difficult to resist. If your peer group were careless with money, you'd recognize it, you'd opt out. But they're not careless. They're competent. They have real equity. They've built real businesses or advanced in real careers. And so their lifestyle doesn't read as aspiration. It reads as calibration, as evidence of what's normal at this level. But here's the structural problem. They can afford it sustainably, and you cannot. Not yet. They have savings rates of 35%. You have a savings rate of 12%. They have income-generating assets. You have salary. They have redundancy. You have efficiency. And when you attempt to replicate their spending without replicating their financial architecture, you're not closing the gap, you're widening it. This is why financial progress can still feel precarious. Let me show you a second-order consequence most people don't anticipate. The reason you want to approximate your successful peers' lifestyle isn't superficial. It's not status seeking for its own sake. It's because you associate their lifestyle with autonomy, with freedom from constraint, with the capacity to make choices on your terms. And you're correct, they do have more autonomy. But here's the inversion. When you replicate their lifestyle without replicating their financial structure, you don't acquire autonomy. You forfeit it. Every marginal expense you add to maintain peer alignment is a constraint you're imposing on your future. Every recurring cost reduces your ability to decline work, to transition careers, to leave situations that aren't serving you, to take calculated risks. Your successful peer can take 18 months off between roles, can turn down clients, can relocate without financial stress, not because they're reckless, but because their baseline expenses are covered by assets, not active income. You cannot, because you've constructed a lifestyle that requires salary continuity. You've traded future flexibility for present alignment. And the paradox is that you made this trade in pursuit of autonomy. You upgraded your life because you wanted to feel like you'd reached a stage of independence, like you had arrived. But you constructed a structure that requires you to keep running. This is the part most people miss. This isn't about discipline. You are disciplined. You're not overspending relative to income. You're not accumulating credit card debt. You're contributing to retirement accounts. You're doing what you're supposed to do. The problem is architectural, not behavioral. You're comparing yourself to people who operate on different financial infrastructure, and you're attempting to run equivalent consumption on incompatible systems. They have equity. You have salary. They have diversified income streams. You have singular income. They have assets that compound independent of labor. You have linear earnings. They have margin. You have optimization. And when you optimize your lifestyle to approximate theirs, you're not building toward their position. You're obscuring the gap. You're creating surface equivalence without underlying sustainability. Let's quantify what this costs over time. The accumulation cost. Assume you're 33. You're earning $95,000. Your peer group begins to advance. You recalibrate. You increase baseline expenses by $400 monthly to maintain what feels like normal alignment. That's $4,800 annually. Over 10 years, that's $48,000 in direct cash flow. But that's not the actual cost. That's just the nominal outflow. The real cost is opportunity cost. If you had invested that $4,800 annually at an average 7% return, you'd have $66,000 in 10 years. That's not retirement capital, but it's optionality. It's the capacity to take an unpaid sabbatical, to make a career pivot, to absorb an unexpected disruption without financial crisis. Now extend this across multiple expense categories. The apartment differential, the vehicle, the travel, the services, the incremental dining and entertainment. Suddenly the gap isn't $4,800 annually. It's $14,000 annually. Over 10 years, at 7%, that's not $66,000. That's $193,000. That's not a missed vacation. That's financial independence delayed by 4 years. Possibly more. And you never consciously decided to make that trade. You adjusted, month by month, decision by decision, reasonably. This is why intelligent, financially literate people still fall into this pattern. Because each individual adjustment is rational. The apartment makes sense. The car makes sense. The quality of life improvements make sense. None of it is reckless in isolation. But the aggregate effect is a structural transformation in your financial position that you didn't deliberately choose. You believed you were maintaining your position within your peer group. You were actually locking yourself into a higher expense baseline that systematically reduces long-term optionality. Here's another mental model that clarifies the mechanism. Consumption horizon compression. When you're 26 and earning $55,000, you operate with deferred consumption. You delay gratification because you must. You're building. You're in accumulation mode. When you're 37 and earning $110,000, you feel like you've reached a stage where you can consume more freely. And you have. But here's the trap. Your successful peers are still operating with deferred consumption. Not in the same visible way. Not obviously. But structurally. They're still playing a long-term game. They're living well, yes. But their consumption is funded by asset returns, not salary drawdown. They're spending from investment income, rental cash flow, equity appreciation. Their lifestyle is supported by infrastructure that continues to compound even while they consume. You're consuming from salary, which means every dollar spent is a dollar that exits the compounding system permanently. Your consumption is immediate and terminal. Theirs is sustainable and backed. So, when you compress your consumption horizon to match theirs, you're not catching up. You're locking yourself into a pattern where you consume today what should be compounding for tomorrow. And the gap compounds. Let me show you what this looks like at 43. You've been disciplined. You haven't made obvious mistakes. You've saved consistently. But you're still operating with minimal margin. Your peer, who exited their startup, isn't working traditional employment anymore. They're advising. They're angel investing. They're building something new without urgency. They have time. Your peer who made partner is now running their own firm, earning $400,000, acquiring their second property, financially secure in a way that feels structurally unreachable. You're still grinding, still optimizing, still trying to increase savings rate. But the expenses are embedded now. The apartment, the car, the lifestyle. You can't downgrade without it signaling regression. You can't reset without acknowledging miscalibration. So you continue. Keep working. Keep hoping the next promotion creates breathing room. But it won't. Because when the promotion arrives, the reference point will have shifted again, and you'll recalibrate again. And the pattern perpetuates. This is the recognition that's difficult to integrate. You cannot win this by trying to keep pace. Not because you're incapable. Not because you lack discipline. But because the game operates on different rules for people at different financial stages. Your peers aren't playing the game you think they are. They're operating with different constraints, different resources, different time horizons. And when you attempt to mirror their visible outcomes without mirroring their underlying structure, you're not competing. You're compounding disadvantage. So what is the reorientation? I'm not going to provide a framework. This isn't a tactical problem. But here's the cognitive shift. Stop optimizing for equivalence. Start optimizing for structural integrity. Your objective is not to live the same lifestyle as your most advanced peers. Your objective is to build the financial architecture that produces the autonomy they possess. And those two goals require opposite behaviors in the near term. Autonomy emerges from margin, from high savings rates, from assets that compound without continuous input, from low fixed expenses, from the capacity to decline opportunities that don't align. Equivalence comes from spending, from signaling, from adopting visible markers of success before you have the infrastructure to support them sustainably. Most people choose equivalence because it feels like progress. It feels like validation. But it's not. It's expensive synchronization. And it quietly erodes the thing you're actually trying to build. Here's the shift in perspective. You don't need to live like your most successful peers today. You need to construct the foundation that allows you to live like them in a decade without financial fragility. And that requires a different form of discipline. Not the discipline of avoiding wasteful spending. The discipline of declining reasonable spending. Good spending. Spending that feels appropriate for your current position. Because appropriate is the trap. Appropriate means calibrated to your reference group. And if your reference group is financially ahead of you, appropriate means overspending relative to your structure. Let me be precise. This is not about artificial scarcity. It's not about living as though you're broke when you're not. It's not about performative frugality or deprivation. It's about recognizing that the lifestyle you can sustain comfortably is different from the lifestyle you can afford temporarily. And when you prioritize sustainability over synchronization, you're not falling behind. You're building quietly while others are broadcasting. That doesn't feel rewarding in the short term. It doesn't feel like winning. But in 10 years, it's the difference between financial security and financial brittleness. Here's what most people don't articulate. The most financially secure people you know aren't living at the edge of their capacity. They're living substantially below it. Not because they're conservative, because they're structurally sound. They have margin, they have assets, they have redundancy, and that foundation is what enables them to live well without strain. You're observing the output, the lifestyle, the ease, and you're attempting to replicate it. But you're not seeing the foundation, the years they spent building, the consumption they deferred, the decisions they made when no one was watching. And when you attempt to bypass that phase, you're not accelerating. You're extracting from your future. This is the hidden cost of keeping up with successful peers. It's not the money you spend. It's the optionality you surrender, the flexibility you trade, the margin you consume, the autonomy you defer. And you trade it for something that feels like progress, but is actually alignment. Alignment to a reference point that continuously moves, that you can never fully reach. That leaves you perpetually behind, even as your income grows. You don't need to exceed your peers. You don't need to match them. You don't need to prove your position. You need to construct a foundation that allows you to live well without fragility. That produces time. That produces choice. That produces the capacity to decline what doesn't serve you. And that requires a different game, a quieter game, a game that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't signal, that doesn't seek external validation. It requires you to stop optimizing for how your life appears to others and start optimizing for how your life functions for you, not in an abstract sense, in a concrete, structural sense. Does your life have margin? Can you take a year off if circumstances require it? Can you turn down work that's misaligned? Can you make a significant life change without financial catastrophe? If the answer is no, you're not doing well. You're optimized. And optimization is not security. The people you're attempting to keep pace with aren't trying to keep pace with anyone. They built something. And now they're operating from that foundation. You can build that as well. But not by mirroring their consumption, by mirroring their structure, their patience, their willingness to live below capacity while they build. That's not exciting. It doesn't feel like achievement. It doesn't photograph well. But in a decade, it's the difference between autonomy and obligation, between optionality and constraint, between security and synchronization. You're not falling behind. You're just playing a different game than you realize. And once you see that with clarity, the question isn't how to keep up. It's whether keeping up is the game you actually want to play.